Hey everyone, so I'm recording this in April of 2020, and right now the whole world seems to be irrationally afraid of something right now. And I thought I'd share a video of some misconceptions that I had in the past that also caused me to be afraid of things that were I was way overblown about the fear. When I first learned chemistry, I used to have a big fear of a number of chemicals. At first, I feared of hydrochloric acid. The reason being that we used it in our science lab, and it had a mysterious name to it, hydrochloric acid, right? And it was an acid, and the fact that it could dissolve certain metals, and so after I got over that fear, actually the fear itself was kind of funny. I would be in the middle of doing an experiment involving the hydrochloric acid, and I would be so nervous that my hands would literally shake as I'm pouring it, and then I would make a mess trying to pour it, and then I would be afraid and I would run away, right? Eventually I had to ask my classmate to help me with anything that involved. We didn't use it very often, but every time we did, I had to ask a classmate of mine to help me, and it became a funny joke that I was afraid of hydrochloric acid. I think my other classmate gave a funny name to hydrochlorophobia or something like that. That's what he called me. And it became a very funny situation. And one day he had called that name so many times that I became so frustrated that I decided to pick up the acid and do it myself because I wanted to lose that name. And I picked up the acid and everybody just stared at me because everybody knew I was afraid of the hydrochloric acid. And everybody's staring at me. The whole room goes quiet for a second. Everybody's cheering me on to pour the acid. And I was nervous about the acid itself and about everybody staring at me. I poured all of the acid out of the beaker. And our teacher looked up, and we were in 8th grade at this time. My teacher looked up, and he screamed at me. And he thought that I meant to pour the acid out of the container and have everybody look at me for doing it, and he screamed at me, and I was embarrassed. I didn't want my teacher to know I had a fear of hydrochloric acid, that I had hydrochlorophobia, and so I just kind of admitted that I poured it outside of the beaker on purpose, and I took the because I'd rather get in trouble than to admit that I was so afraid of chemistry, because I knew chemistry was his passion. He and I got along very well, except for the fact that I had this big fear. So finally, that helped me get over the fear, because some of the hydrochloric acid landed on my clothes, and I went to wash it off, and it was no big deal. It didn't burn or anything. And so I kind of got over the fear. You know, I also got to learn what to do if you spill hydrochloric acid. Our teacher went to where I had spilled the acid, and he poured baking soda over it. It fizzed up a little bit, and it just showed to me that it's not a big deal if acid spills. We didn't have to evacuate the school. It didn't explode or anything, and so that was good. So I got over the fear of the hydrochloric acid, but then I started to learn even more advanced chemistry. By this time, I was also going to college part-time, and I learned about hydrofluoric acid, I learned about aqua regia, and I learned about fluorine and how it was used during World War I. And I learned about electrolysis, and then I got this big fear of electrolysis because I learned you can make fluorine and chlorine and all the other toxic gases with electrolysis, and I learned about aqua regia. And I thought, because I knew fluoride was added to toothpaste and also to water in some cities, and I thought if electricity came into contact with water, it would, or with fluoride, it would make fluorine gas. And I learned all these horror stories about what fluorine could do. It could dissolve glass. And I just had this big fear that if I got a battery in tap water, or better yet, in toothpaste, that it would make fluorine gas. I guess it never occurred to me why, people drop batteries in water probably all the time, and you don't hear news stories about some 5-year-old kid who's playing with batteries in water and gets fluorine poisoning, right? I guess it never crossed my mind that. I just let my mind wander way too far. And one time I was reading food labels, and fortunately I don't consume this ingredient anymore, but one day I was reading food labels, And I noticed that nitrates were added to, I believe it was either hot dogs or bacon, right? Fortunately, I avoid this ingredient, but for other reasons than the fear I had. So I thought you had nitrates in hot dogs, and most people use plenty of salt in their hot dogs, right, or in any sort of meat, right? And if you had anything acidic, right, and you mixed it with salt and nitrates, well, you would make hydrochloric and nitric acid, which is aqua regia. And it was a scary concept for me. I remember I would be eating hot dogs. At this time, I didn't start avoiding the ingredients. I still love my hot dogs, but I'd be eating it and I would feel burning sensations because I was imagining that I had aqua regia in my stomach. And I thought, I was reading a list of different oxidizing agents, and I learned about the hydrogen peroxide. And I thought that in the right conditions, if you had hydrogen peroxide and some kind of salt, it might make chlorine gas. And I remember that I would be rinsing my mouth with hydrogen peroxide or putting it on a cut. And because I was imagining that it would make chlorine, I thought I smelled chlorine from the mixture. And it just became a big imagination world for me, that I would imagine all these horrors of aqua regia and fluorine and chlorine. And then I learned a little bit of physics, and I learned that if you pass a wire through a magnetic field, it makes an electric current. And I used to have a big fear that if you had a strong magnet nearby, it could give you an electrical shock. And I would literally feel tingling sensations if I went to get a magnet, or I was playing with magnets, or I would be removing a magnet from the refrigerator, and I would just feel this twinge because I was imagining that electricity was running through me. It's just kind of like how in April 2020 that I'm recording this, some people, they're near somebody who coughs and they instantly imagine they have all sorts of symptoms of all sorts of diseases that they've never come into contact with. It was kind of like, when they finally get the disease, they might get over that fear. It's kind of like when I spilled hydrochloric acid on myself that time, and I got over my hydrochlorophobia, but I still had other phobias. I've since experimented with aqua regia as well. I've never done hydrofluoric acid. I don't have the right equipment to be messing around with that stuff, and we never did it at school either. I've watched plenty of YouTube videos. Thank God for YouTube. I don't have to do any of this anymore myself. Thanks for watching.